Hare Krishna, welcome everybody to Sunday Feast program in Alachua. We'll be speaking tonight on Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2. But since we're having a rather spontaneous day, we usually have it put up on the board, but the board person's not here either, so you're just going to have to wing it as I go along. Anyway, we start off with a song that's a prayer. A song that's a prayer because all our life needs to be dedicated to prayer. We need to have some intention in our life. I just recognized you. Hare Krishna. We need to have intention in our life and fix our mind on something. So before we speak about the Lord or the philosophy or Krishna, we try to invoke a prayerful mood, praying for the mercy of the realized devotees to help enter into our minds and hearts so that we can speak something that's beneficial. Hare Krishna. Beneficial. Sorry, just seeing a few old friends. To everyone, yes. Okay, a little message from the side is this the person who sponsored the feast, are they here in the audience? Or in hearing distance?
What's their name?
We don't know their name. That's why we're asking who they are. We're doing everything, winging it, as it's called today.
Whoever sponsored it.
Yeah.
Honesty is the first policy.
Okay, anyway. We like to acknowledge those people who help out. Okay, prayerful mood. We try to bring ourselves into a prayerful mood before we speak, and also perhaps you could, if you'd like to take a few moments of reflection, to bring yourself into a prayerful mood to hear. Because even though one thing is being spoken, many people hear it according to what they need to hear, and perhaps there'll be something that the Lord directs that will be beneficial. Oh, there's a person for the computer. Okay, Hare Krishna. Jaya Radha Madhava Kundabi Hari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kundabi Hari. Hari. Jayam Vishnupad, Paramahansa, Paripadrakacharya, Astochara Satoshi Sriman, His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnava Ki Jai, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Shikaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. No, bring up all the verses, So there's first the English verses. Sorry, 1 second. The English verse, chapter 2, up to 14. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai, Gaur Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the unassembled devotees who are somewhere in the ether. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna. So, we are going to read tonight from Bhagavad Gita. We're on chapter 2. I'd like to do chapter 2. Chapter 2, obviously, it's just the beginning of the story. There's so many fundamental philosophical principles that are given in chapter 2 that are the basis, they're the building blocks for the whole philosophy, or a lot of the philosophy anyway. And they're given very concisely and precisely in chapter 2. So sometimes what we do in classes is we're looking at one verse. We take our microscope out and we look at one verse and we analyze it, and etc., etc. But tonight I'm going to take a step back a little bit, look at a series of verses so you can see how the information builds up and builds up a solid foundation, and each previous step or each step along the way is dependent on the information in the previous verse. So if you could put up the English translations to second chapter, up to verse 14. We're gonna emphasize verse 14 when we get there, but we haven't got there yet. Sorry. Okay, forget those. I'm gonna put them over here. Okay. Yeah, don't forget to turn the screen on when you're ready. Okay, so we're on chapter 2. So just to formulate, get you accustomed to what's going on in the Bhagavad Gita. So the scene is actually on a battlefield. Arjuna, the great devotee of the Lord, there's many years of build-up prior to this scene of a battle. Long story about the battle, etc., etc. But the point is that it's in a very pivotal place for Arjuna. There he is, just like if we divided, if we divided this room in half, and this side was one group of soldiers, and that side is another group of soldiers. Okay, so there's Arjuna ready to fight, and he's expert in fighting. He's been trained his whole life as a combat soldier. And everybody's all lined up, and it's not that there's just 20 people on one side and 20 people on another side. There's millions, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of people all lined up. But the thing is, when it gets together, when the scene unfolds, when the story starts opening for us, there's Arjuna wanting to see the strength of the adversary. And he goes out and he looks at both sides and he realizes, I have a relationship. These are not foreigners. These are not strangers to me. These are not just, bodies like ant bodies that you don't really care about. These people on this side, they're my relatives. But guess what? The people on this side are his relatives too. So it's a fratricidal war, and he's seeing, although conscious of it all up until this point, but to see them there arrayed like that in a fighting spirit really knocks the wind out of him, knocks the wind out of his consciousness, and he gets very disturbed. And he says, I can't do this. I can't do it. And as a person born in the West, for myself, speaking for myself, not knowing when I first read Bhagavad Gita, that's what I did. I read Bhagavad Gita without knowing the history behind it and this and that. And I thought, oh yeah, he's fighting with his relatives. Yeah, that's too bad. But the history behind it is really involved and really dramatic also. The intricacies and the nuances of the the difficulty. So anyway, he sees everybody. He's got a relationship with everybody, not just the enemy, but also his whole army is friends and relatives and supporters. So that's the scene that's unfolding here. So when he sees that, are you able to get the screen on, Karnapur? Oh, okay. Okay, so as he sees the thing unfolding, he becomes weakened in his determination. And that's where we're entering. This is chapter 2. This is called the content summarized, because Krishna is going to give Arjuna a few quick lessons to try to bring him to his, a proper perspective of things. There we go. Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Karnapur. So, I'm going to just go over the first verses kind of quickly. So, Sanjaya, he's the person that's a narrator. Sanjaya says, oh, and I might have a tad difference. Okay, there might be a tad difference between my book and what's on the board, but the essence is the same. Sanjaya said, seeing Arjuna full of compassion and very sorrowful. Okay. Seeing Arjuna full of compassion, his mind depressed, his eyes full of tears, Madhusudan Krishna spoke the following words. Text 2 is the Supreme Person, and that's another very special characteristic. There's Arjuna, bewildered, confused, whatever, but he just happens to have the Supreme Personality of Godhead right there by his side, physically. We all have the Supreme Personality of Godhead by our side, but he's inside, and sometimes we don't connect with that so well. We need to purify our vision and our heart and our intention in order to connect with that, connect with Krishna strongly. But Arjuna, there he was. Krishna was on the outside, and the inside too. Okay, so the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, my dear Arjuna, how have these impurities come upon you? They are not at all befitting a man who knows the value of life. They lead not to higher planets, but to infamy. So let's just, who knows the value of life. Interesting phrase, right? To be said on a battlefield. One would think, value of life, he's about to kill everybody. What is he talking about, the value of life? He's talking about the value of the human form of life. This human form of life, Srila Prabhupada in the Vedic literature stress over and over and over again. Human form of life is very valuable because we can ask questions. What's the stock market rate? No, not those questions. What's my purpose in life? What happens? Where did I come from? How did I get here? Where am I going? And we have the ability to discern and ask those questions and find answers along our path, our spiritual path, and understand that that's what makes this human form of life valuable. An animal, dog, cat, cockroach, or whomever, they're totally forced by the body that they're in. They're forced to act like that animal. A dog is forced to act like a dog and bark and this and sniff and eat what dogs eat, etc., etc. Animals are forced to act like that. Humans have an intelligence to discern and discriminate, and they have a choice. I can act this way, I can act that way. And if I act this way, I get that result, and if I act that way, this comes upon me. That's like, it's the door out of here. It's the door out of here. So Vedic literature explains that there's 8,400,000 varieties of species of life. 8,400,000. And in order to get to the human form of life, we have traversed through every single species. And even if every life was just 1 year, that's a lot of years, right? And we know that there's the varieties of years of life in different bodies, etc., etc. So it's way more than 8,400,000 years to get to this human. It's a valuable opportunity. And then what we do in this life, in the human form of life, there's what's called karma. There's action, and then there's reaction to the deeds. There's good actions getting good karma. There's bad actions bringing bad karma, bad reactions. So this life is a mix of good and bad. And not all the good and bad, just some of the good and bad that we've done in human form of life. Animal life, there's no karma. The dog kills the cat, even if it's your favorite cat, the dog killed him, he doesn't get any karma for that. It's not murder for him. He's just forced. Animals just progress upward. Human beings, because they have the choice and the supposed intelligence to discern what's right and what's wrong, there's a reaction for the things they do, and so there's a mixture of reactions, good and bad. Back to the point here, Krishna said they're not at all befitting. These arguments that Arjuna was saying aren't befitting somebody who knows the value of life, who knows that this life is a particular opportunity. Now what he's getting there, in case you're thinking that Krishna's propagating violence, he's not. He has a plan. And he wants Arjuna to execute his plan, to execute the Lord's plan. That's a whole big subject, which I'm not going to go into. But if you have a question on it, we can maybe talk about it at the end. But anyway, so what Krishna's point is to get Arjuna to act according to his will. Align ourselves. So our take-home message is to align ourselves with the will of the Lord. And act in a way that will be pleasing to the Lord. Okay, so, and he said, Krishna says, these actions that are not in line with my will, they are not going to lead you to a nice place. They're going to lead you to lower birth. Okay, text 3. O son of Pritha, that's his mother's Pritha. O son of Pritha, do not yield to this degrading impotence. It does not become you. Give up such petty weakness of heart and arise, O chastiser of the enemy. 4 is... now this is Arjuna's, one of his counter-arguments. O killer of the enemies, O killer of Madhu, how can I counterattack with arrows in battle men like Bhishma and Drona who are worthy of my worship? There's a whole big explanation you could give on that, but we're going to go on. 5. It's better to live in this world. It would be better to live in this world by begging than to live at the cost of the lives of great souls who are my teachers. Even though desiring worldly gain, the other guys are desiring worldly gain, they are superiors. If they are killed, everything we enjoy will be tainted with blood. So you can see that Arjuna is not an ordinary person. He's a very, very thoughtful person. It would be better to live in this world by begging than to live at the cost of the lives of the great souls who are my teachers. Even though desiring worldly gain, they are superiors. If they are killed, everything we enjoy will be tainted with blood. Let's go on. Now, here's expressing a little bit of his confusion. So he's confused. What's better for me to do? Fight and kill these relatives and friends and superiors, or go away? So he says, nor do we know which is better, conquering them or being conquered by them. If we kill the sons of Dhritarashtra, we should not care to live, yet they are now standing before us on this battlefield. Okay, here, next verse is a very significant verse for us. Now he says, now I'm confused about my duty and have lost all composure because of miserly weakness. In this condition, I'm asking you to tell me for certain. I'm confused. You tell me for certain what's best for me. And then he gets in a very submissive mood. Now I'm your disciple and a soul surrendered to you. Please instruct me. So that mood doesn't last very long. So he says, I can find no means to drive away this grief. which is drying up my senses. I'll not be able to dispel it, even if I win a prosperous, unrivaled kingdom on earth with sovereignty like that of the demigods in heaven. I won't be able to figure this out on my own. I want you to tell me what's best for me. And now, he says, his mood changes a tad. He says, having spoken thus, Arjuna, chastiser of the enemy, told Krishna, Govinda, I shall not fight. So 2 verses before he said, I'm a soul surrendered unto you, please tell me what to do. And now he says, I'm not going to do it. Anyway, it's quite typical of our mental platform that we go through. Obviously not in that same scenario, but just on a day-to-day basis about things. Okay, we're getting to some of our building blocks of fundamental philosophical points. We've got one more verse to go, and then we'll get into that. Okay, then Krishna says, O descendant of Bharat, at that time Krishna, smiling, that's significant, in the midst of the both armies spoke the following words to the grief-stricken Arjuna. So Arjuna's having a meltdown, and Krishna's smiling, because he's aloof from that. Okay, so text 11, he says, the blessed Lord said, are we on? Yeah, okay. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, while speaking learned words, you are mourning for what is not worthy of grief. Those who are wise lament neither for the living nor the dead. Now, take that as a standalone verse. If we didn't know the scene, this and that, it sounds rather cold, doesn't it? Those who are wise lament neither for the living. They don't have any lamentation. We might want to put the word in compassion, but anyway, they don't have any, they're not feeling sorry for somebody who's alive and the suffering they're going through. They're not feeling sorry for them, and they're not feeling sorry for a dead person either. And it sounds rather cold. Let's go a little deeper and see what Krishna is really saying. Now, here's a very fundamental, our first very important building block of philosophical understanding. Krishna says, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings. In the past, I existed, and you existed before this present body. We might be in this body 7 or 8 years, or we might be in this body 70 years. But I was around 100 years ago, but just in a different shape. You didn't know it. I don't know who I was then either. But anyway, I was around because Krishna is saying it's the soul. It's the soul within the body which is enlivening the body. It's the difference. Just like Krishna consciousness tells you, one of our basic points is, or questions you could ask somebody, what's the difference between a live body and a dead body? It's not a bunch of chemicals. The difference isn't the amount of chemicals that are in one body and another body. It's the presence of the consciousness, the soul. The symptom of the soul is the consciousness. So when the soul leaves the body, then the body is what you could say in Hare Krishna terms is a lump of flesh. You got a lump of flesh on the ground there because the soul's not there. And then the body, without the presence of the soul, the body isn't as attractive as it was an hour before or a few years before or whatever. That lump of flesh very quickly gets very unpleasant and smelly and deteriorates right before your eyes. And for those of us who have had the instructional opportunity to see a person alive and then see them dead, it's a huge difference in the way they look. Huge difference in the way they look. Without the consciousness there, it's a huge difference. So it's another proof to see. Never mind, I won't say that. Okay, so Krishna's saying to Arjuna, I didn't even finish the whole thing, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor anyone, not any of these people, nor all of these kings. And in the future shall any of us cease to be, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. You say, oh, my name is Nanda. What's your name? And you say Peter or Joe, or you say, Krishna Das or whomever. But that person, that body that we're in, that we identify, yes, I'm an old lady, yes, I'm a this, yes, I'm a that, that's not who we are. We're programmed to think that's who we are, but we have a journey that we've gone through to get to this point, and a journey further on in the future, because our real identity is a soul. Now, for those of us who have been around Krishna consciousness for a while, we do hear this quite often. You're not your body, Prabhu. Oh, you're not your body, Prabhu. Oh, and we think, oh yeah, that's right. And then 2 seconds later, what do we think? Oh, this is uncomfortable. Or I'm hot, or I'm cold, or I like this person, or that person's bothering me. Whatever, I think on a bodily platform quite often, to be totally truthful. But we hear higher philosophy that brings us to these transcendental realizations. What's so important about thinking that you're not your body? Well, the important thing is not the negative effect that you're not the body, but the important thing is the positive effect, who you are, who we are. Really, we're a spirit soul that's undergoing a material body voyage. We're not a body that's trying to become a spirit. We are a spirit. We are a spirit soul that's eternal, that has a relationship with the Lord that is superior to all our relationships, and that when we focus on that relationship, our other relationships that we have with other people also can be put into a better perspective, let's say. And Krishna's going to say some more about that when I turn the page. Okay, another building block, a really big building block in Krishna conscious philosophy is this text 13. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. Now that's a very important piece of information to have in your transcendental pocket, to pull it out when you see. Now just in this group of 30 or 40 people right here, we have people, 8 or 9 years old, we have people 20 years old and up. And the 8 or 9-year-old person might think, looking at an old, gray-haired, wrinkly person, might think, when I get old, I'm not going to look like that. Not me. I'm going to be strong. I'm going to be this. I'm going to be that. I'm going to be able to stand up straight. I'm going to be able to walk when I want to walk and things like that. But we don't know what's going to happen. Old age is going to be forced upon us in different ways and shapes and forms, and we can't stop it no matter how powerful or how many push-ups we do or how much yoga we do or whatever. You can't stop it. That's what it's called being in the material world. The material world has its cyclic effect. So this is also a very important understanding too, that this, just as we can remember when we were young children running around doing this and that, and the body and maybe some of our mindset and the things that we were attracted to as a young person. Then when we got to be a youth, and those toys that we played with, the dolls or the Nintendo games or whatever, I don't even know what's available these days, whatever, they're not so attractive to you. Because you get a different mindset, and maybe sports are more attractive, and maybe this is more attractive, maybe boys are more attractive, maybe girls are more attractive, whatever. As they go through progress of life, the desires change according to the body. But that's not who we are. Those things just come by force of circumstance, you could say. And who we really are is that spirit soul that's the same inside the body. The spirit soul in a 9-year-old body is not 9 years old, The spirit soul in a 70-year-old body is not 70 years old. Because why? Because Krishna just told us, I always existed in the past, and I'm going to continue to exist in the future, so that means I'm eternal. And that, at first hearing, might not seem so significant, but at repeated hearing, it becomes more and more significant. Because what are we doing to fortify our spiritual life? And that's one of our points in Krishna consciousness. This is, just in case you haven't noticed, this is Hare Krishna 101 lesson. Introductory Hare Krishna. For all of those of you who've been around for a while, it's a little repeat. But for those of you who are new to it, hopefully there'll be something you can grab on that you might think is worth investigating a little bit more. So, what are we doing to nourish, fortify, and make our path of eternity, eternal identity clearer and connected? And that's the things, some of the practices that we learn in Krishna consciousness movement, and by reading these Vedic literature, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, etc., etc. So this verse here explains a very deep philosophical principle in a very simple way. As the embodied soul passes from a youth to an old age, or from a young boy to a youth to old age, the soul is going to pass. The soul has already passed. It was a total different, when I was 8 or 9 years old, it was a totally different body, 100% different body than this body, etc., etc., all those other changes that get you up to 70 years old. It's a totally different body. But there's something that's the same, because I can remember a few things. And it's getting less and less every day what I can remember. But anyway, I can remember a few things that I did when I was 7 or 8 or 9 years old. And I can remember a few things that I did when I was 30 years old. And I can remember a few mistakes I made when I was 40, etc., etc. That consciousness is a symptom of the soul, and it's showing that there's a soul that's passing through those different bodies. Okay, now, here's the verse that we were going to study tonight. Text 14. Can we bring up the Sanskrit? Yeah. Okay, I'll just chant the Sanskrit quickly enough. And if you'd like, you can repeat. Matra sparshastu kaunteya. Shitoshna shuka dukada. Agamapayino nityas. Tams titikshashva bharata. Okay, as we go on with our building blocks of spiritual information, that is, each one builds on the previous verses. So here Krishna is saying, O son of Kunti, I'll read it from there. O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and their disappearance in due course, are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. That's very timely, because if you've noticed, we're on the junction of changing seasons. Yay, thank you. It's a little cooler in the mornings these days. It's still heating up in the day, but it's at least a little bit of relief in the morning. So much so that some people have to put on jackets. Okay, anyway. No, it's temporary. Okay, like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons, they arise from what? Sense perception. Whoa, we'll talk about that. O sign of Bharata. And one must learn to? And one must learn to? Hare Krishna. Tolerate them without being? Not easy, is it? One must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. Okay, so if you'd like to look at that verse, you can. But if you'd like to give me in your own words, and I would prefer newer people to answer if they're willing and able to, what do you get from that verse, from that thing? If there's anyone who dares to answer. In your own words. What do you get from that? Non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O scion of Bharata, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. And don't forget our building blocks, other pieces of information that we got along the way. Any volunteers? I know it's scary. Okay, so how about some volunteers who aren't so new to the process? That's a little scary too. Okay, Bhagavad, what would you like to say? Don't tip over.
You said it right, that it's hard to tolerate, you know. And previously where you were saying, oh, you're not the body, Prabhu. Oh, yeah, yeah. And then 2 seconds later, it's like somebody cuts you off in traffic and you're, you know, it's theoretically, this part is simple. But living it, it's a challenge every day.
Thank you. Thanks. Anyone else would like to add their comments? Yes. Oh, here, this guy here. I don't know what his name is, but he has an orangey shirt. Thank you. It's coming around. Thank you. Can you tell me what your name is?
Alex.
Alex. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Thoughts or whatever your thoughts are on that.
For me, it's another way of saying, or another reminder to live from that transcendent state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Say some more if you'd like to.
It's sort of, so kind of the point you were making and the other woman was making, it's very difficult to tolerate when we're actively kind of sucked into the movie. But when we're existing from a state that's beyond that, then it's more,
very good.
you know, equanimous through experience.
Yeah, very good. And there was another devotee in the back there. Can you pass the mic in behind? Thank you, Alex.
Hare
And your
Krishna.
name? Your name?
My name Abhiram Gopal.
Abhiram
Das.
Gopal Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So, externals will change, and those externals are perceived by the person, depending upon how they are perceiving. It could be perceived as happiness or distress, but the circumstances will keep changing, just like summer comes and then winter comes. And when one is, you know, because of sense perception, is one is properly trained in understanding that the way we are perceiving in a bodily level is actually not who we are. We are actually soul. The previous shloka talks about it. So that helps in being able to tolerate without being disturbed, which otherwise would not be possible.
Very good. Right. And it's a building block of information. If we understand that we're spirit, we understand that my real identity is eternal, then all of the botherations that I go through, which are called life, and if I'm tired and hungry, things bother me a lot quicker. And if I'm grouchy, whoosh, good luck. And if I'm, well rested and, whatever, I can maybe act in a different way, because it's the same, just like we have a circumstance. Life has so many little quirks to it. So some things which are not big things really bother people. Practical example, fans. In the summer, there are a class of people that really like fans, and they turn them on really high. And there's another class of people who don't like fans blowing on their head all the time. What is that? Nothing. It's nothing. But it's, for my sense perception, it's a bother. For someone else's sense perception, it's the only way they can tolerate the Florida heat, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's nothing. But if I get all worked up about thinking this is me and I'm right and I'm the most important one here, and doesn't everybody know that I should be comfortable, no matter what you are, and you're less important than me, all of those very, very petty identifications and petty conceptions that I have make a very small, insignificant thing very significant, and I get very disturbed by it. But if we can, if I can, and apply it to ourselves in our own circumstances, if we can remember heat and cold, happiness and stress comes and goes, it's going to pass. Now we're going to be 2 months ago we were complaining about the heat, and in 1 month, guess what we're going to be complaining about, aside from the hurricane that's coming, but aside from that, we're going to be complaining about the cold, right? Some of us are, you know? It's the same thing, but what am I doing? What are we doing? So Krishna gives us a higher principle to guide our life by, and that's in the rest of the book. Look, a lot more there. But just these basic beginning, because the second chapter has a lot more verses in itself also, but just this basic beginning is so much food for thought and nourishment for our real identity, and brings a peaceful atmosphere in the self when we bring it home to ourselves, that it gives us clarity of thought and action in our activities. You have something? No, because it's on nice and low. Thank you, Hare Krishna. Thanks. But yeah, so that's one thing. I'm going to just read that verse again, and then we'll read the purport. Because okay, got to focus in. All these thoughts are jumping in all at the same time. Here's the verse again, and this is from my book, which is slightly different. But O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and their disappearance in due course, are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O sign of Bharata, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. So, we'll go into the purport. The thing is that about Srila Prabhupada's purports and many of the examples that are given in the verses, it explains a high philosophical point in a very easily digestible way. So here's what Prabhupada says in the purport. In the proper discharge of duty, and the reason that he's saying that is, again, because of the scene of Arjuna on the battlefield. But aside from that scene of Arjuna on the battlefield, in our life, we could bring it to our life so that we have we can relate to what's going on here. In the proper discharge of duty, one has to learn to tolerate non-permanent appearances and disappearances of happiness and distress. According to the Vedic injunction, one has to take his bath early in the morning, even during the month of Magh, which is January, February. It is very cold at that time, but in spite of that, the man who abides by the religious principles does not hesitate to take his bath. In other words, the message is cleanliness is also next to godliness. So that daily bath is a custom that people get into very easily on the spiritual path, because cleanliness is not just we're not talking only about internal cleanliness, but it's manifested by external cleanliness also. Okay, similarly, a woman does not hesitate to cook in the kitchen in the months of May and June, the hottest part of the summer season. One has to execute his duty in spite of climatic inconvenience. Similarly, to fight is the religious principle of the Kshatriyas, or the men in the army, let's say. And although one has to fight with some friend or relative, one should not deviate from his prescribed duty. One has to follow the prescribed rules and regulations of religious principles in order to rise up to the platform of knowledge, because by knowledge and devotion only can one liberate himself from the clutches of Maya, illusion. I'm going to stop there for a minute. There's another little bit of the paragraph, but sometimes some of the points might seem a little abrasive at first, so I'd like to try to smooth them out in case there's some protest in the mind there. So again, the scenario that's being played out here is Arjuna on the battlefield, and he's going in front of the two armies, and he's seeing that everybody is his relative. He's related to everybody on both sides, somehow or other, through huge family connections or intermarriages or friends or family are on both sides. So it's not an easy fight for him. So let's take it in a different scene, because perhaps we'll never experience anything like that in our life, in our day-to-day life, okay? But let's just say there's a robbery down the street. One of the stores gets robbed, okay? The police are called in, and the thief is nearby, and he's running away, and the police go to catch him, and they're ready, and they tell him to surrender, and he doesn't want to surrender, and they're ready to tase him or whatever they're going to do. That's not the point here, but the point is, and then he turns around, and the one who's ready, the policeman, sees, that's my son. Imagine how that dynamics change. That's my sister's son, or you know what I mean? That's my neighbor. He plays with my kids. Imagine how the dynamics change in a scene like that. So take that in. So what's the duty of the law enforcement officer then? It's the same duty, but there's a different dynamic going on because of the attachment and relationship, etc. So we're not, yeah. Okay, so, but the point being here, one has to follow the prescribed rules and regulations of religious principles in order to what? Rise up to the platform of knowledge, because by knowledge and devotion only can one liberate himself from the clutches of Maya or illusion. So again, with our scene of the robber, and somehow or other there's a relationship with that person, it might seem cruel that it's being stated here that the person has to continue on with his duty no matter what. No, it's all changed, but it didn't really change. The dynamics didn't really change in the sense of the person broke the law, and another person's duty is to enforce the law or apprehend or whatever, that duty is the same. So similarly, and the point, a subtle point being, is it's the identification of the relationship, which is what? Temporary, and I'm eternal, and I'm going to get derailed by that temporary relationship and not do my duty in that sense, then that's going to affect me not just for that little scenario, but for my whole career or whatever, but also, again, transcending the whole scene totally, it's going to affect my path of transcendental knowledge, of understanding beyond the bodily relationship. There's an eternal connection with the Lord. It's not an easy thing, and not easy to explain, and not an easy to transcend either. Srila Prabhupada, he gives another example in this circumstance oftentimes when he talks about water. He said, so in the heat of the summer, where does everybody go in North Florida? They go to the springs, and to cool off, because they're so refreshing and everything. So the water is very refreshing. So you'd say, yeah, water is so refreshing. In January, not as many. Some people still go to the springs in January, but not everybody, because the cold air and the cold water are not pleasant to a lot of people. It's the same water, and the water coming out of the ground is probably very similar temperature, mean temperature, but because of the air temperature difference and my perception difference, it's very different to me, and I don't go anywhere near the springs in the winter. You know what I mean? So It's that the previous information, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress arise from sense perception, and they need to be tolerated in order to transcend the material platform. We're just pulling apart these basic building blocks of information and try to make them real for ourselves. Okay, we'll continue on, and then we'll open it up for discussion. The last paragraph talks of technicality about Arjuna's names, okay? The two different names address given to Arjuna are also significant. To address him as Kaunteya signifies he has great blood relationships from his mother's side. His mother's name was Kunti, so Kaunteya means the son of Kunti. So Kunti came from a very illustrious family, etc., etc. And to address him as Bharat signifies his greatness from his father's side. So from both sides, he is supposed to have a great heritage. A great heritage brings responsibility in the matter of proper discharge of duty. Therefore, he cannot avoid fighting. That just reading that reminded me of current events. So now that the Queen of England has left her body, and King Charles takes up the position of the King of England, her son, one of the very first things that I read about King Charles was, he said, "Now I feel the burden of the whole country." Previously, he didn't feel that. Previously, it wasn't his responsibility to act this way or that way, whatever. Now he's got a new weight on his head, literally and figuratively. And so it just brought that to mind when it's referring to Arjuna's heritage. So that's just a little food for thought on some of these beginning verses of the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Questions, comments, doubts, arguments, or thoughts that triggered other thoughts? Yes, Gajendraji.
So this word, tolerate, catches my interest a lot, and I'm looking at it like just to sort of look online at definitions, like what do we mean by tolerate? As a verb, means allow the existence or occurrence without interference, accept or endure. So I'm looking at this, and you use the word surrender at times, and I'm viewing it in some way in sense of like, who's the controller? In other words, I'm not controlling the weather. Someone else, the Parameshwara, is ultimately controlling the weather. And so it seems to be, for me, somewhat indicating this idea of surrendering, that I'm not the controller, but there's another controller. And I view it sort of with the sense that that's one of the lessons that's coming from it. That's sort of preliminary. It's not super advanced along the path of spiritual knowledge. I just want to add one more thing from online. The question is asked, is tolerate positive or negative? It says, based on its Latin origin, tolerance or toleration, as philosophers often refer to it, is most commonly viewed negatively as putting up with. So if I think of Goloka Vrindavan, I don't think, yeah, all the devotees are there tolerating Goloka Vrindavan. And so it seems to be like a preliminary task on the path of spiritual life that relates to giving up that I'm the controller, I'm meant to surrender. And then Prabhupada in his purport puts it in the context of devotional service, like doing your duty in the kitchen.
Yeah, nice points. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, thanks. And that also reminded me of something that I wanted to say about tolerance. And if you notice, so many problems, social problems, this problem, that problem, come from a lack of tolerance, you know? Somebody gets angry and what do? Take out their gun and shoot a bunch of people. Or, you know, road rage or whatever. Because one of the side effects of technological advancement is that we have easy access to information and this and that and change of games and change of so many things, and if something appears boring, we can click and hear and snap and whatever and do so many things to change this or that or whatever. But what's the result? One of the results is, from a non-technological person's perspective, I'm admitting, is we tolerate very little these days. Do you ever notice yourself getting agitated when there's 3 people in the checkout counter line ahead of you? 3 whole people? Ugh, why can't they get it together and have more cashiers over here? Or, you know, more computers or whatever, you know, more checkout. You know, even little things like that. What to speak of, you know, whatever. All these little petty things that we're, in one sense, because of our fast changing pace and opportunity to change our pace fast, we don't tolerate much these days, or as much as we used to. That's another thing. Yes, dear, in the corner. And if you wait a half of a second, the mic is going to come over, and then we'll be able to understand what you're saying better. Thank you, okay? Thanks.
Okay, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you for class. On this topic of tolerance, it just raises a question that it seems a little bit easier to tolerate non-devotees because non-devotees just don't necessarily know better. But then in some cases, when we see devotees acting in ways that we know devotees shouldn't be, how do we go about this?
That is a great subject that I'm not getting into.
Okay.
No, but it's a huge thing. But okay, let's go. It's just a few things on it, a little bit. It's a sign that our tolerance or realization, our understanding isn't very deep, is it? Isn't that a sign of that? That because we're still, what are we still seeing? We're still seeing us. The us acts like this, and the them acts like that. What is that? Bodily concept. I'm me, I'm my body, but I'm not my body. I just read that I wasn't my body. I'm eternal spirit soul. Oh, yeah. Okay, so us acts like this, or we think we should act like this, or we think this is the standard, which we might have a false perception on that too, but that's okay. That's another part of the puzzle piece. And then we're projecting the them and the us and the them. So there we are breaking, you know what I'm saying, one of the first understandings of that I'm a spirit soul, I'm not my body, but guess what? Guess what else that means? They're a spirit soul, and he's a spirit soul, and she's a spirit soul, and they're all spirit souls, and they're covered by different layers of conditioning, and they're acting and sorting according to that conditioning. So therefore, if there's back to the specifics of your question, if there's a relationship with that person who you might perceive and might rightly not acting according to standard protocol, then there might be a chance of a discussion or a question. Another thing is do we jump to a conclusion? They're acting this way, therefore they're fill in the blank, less advanced, less this, whatever, not nice people, whatever. But there might be a reason. Just remember now, nice devotee from Washington, D.C. area, Braj Bihari Prabhu, was saying, and there's an example that's, okay, he was saying that he practices that a mantra when he's driving and somebody cuts him off. If somebody cuts him off when he's driving and it's about to make him a little angry, he thinks, maybe that person is driving his wife to the hospital because she's giving birth right in the car and he's in a hurry. Now, doesn't that change your perception of the guy who cut you off? There was another example that was given about a typical day in a person's life, he goes to get his favorite cup of coffee, and as he's pulling into the place, the Starbucks or wherever it is, somebody grabs, cuts him off and grabs his parking space. That gets him a little miffed. Then he goes in, and his favorite teller, waitress, personality that waits on him is a little less attentive that day and seems distracted, and that puts him off. And different little things like that put him off. And then the result is a bad mood. But what happens is that later on in the day, he gets a pair of magic glasses. And when he puts the magic glasses on, not only does he see the scene, but he can understand why it's happening. So the person who cut him off to get the parking space in front of him, they had just spent the whole night with their dying husband who's leaving his body any minute, and they had to just run out and get a few things or this and that to, so that they should be able to, handle the rest of the day. That really puts a different perspective on it, doesn't it? And the person who was supposed to be getting his coffee the way he likes it, et cetera, is struggling with an addiction, and it happens to be flaring up today, so they're not at their usual level, but they're trying to keep their job and you know what I mean? So it just puts a different, so when we see things, we think that, and I think this all the time, because I don't mean to say for 1 second, I'm holier than thou. No way, I am holier, got lots of holes. Okay, we think that the way I perceive the thing is what's really the truth. But what's the problem there? There's 4 problems there. Imperfect senses, tendency to cheat, illusion. I see something and I still come to a different conclusion. I see that black cord as a big, long centipede. I'm seeing it, but I'm seeing something different than what it is. Illusion, cheating, imperfect senses, and mistakes. That's me, mistakes, yeah. So, and then I think, oh yeah, I understand. I understand why he did that. He did that because he doesn't like me. Well, I don't like him either for doing that. You know what I mean? And I get a whole attitude that's based on a falsehood. But if I could remember for more than a half of a second to learn to tolerate these little incidences, then I'd be in a better place. And that's the gist of Bhagavad Gita. If we could learn to apply these things with practice. That's some of the things. Did anyone else have anything they'd like to add? Any comments or questions or whatever? Okay, so that's just a little bit. I hope there's something in there that you found a little valuable, and pray to Srila Prabhupada that there's some takeaway there. Jai Srila Prabhupada, Jai Shri Bhagavad Gita, Hari Bol. And don't forget to read Bhagavad Gita.